leave children behind. But when it played out, then it became a testing program and nothing else. That law was repealed a couple of years ago. Just last year, we replaced it with Every Student Succeeds. That bill took a heavy step in removing power from Washington, sending it back to local school boards, back to teachers. It did a dramatic thing in that it reversed the core curriculum that was being instituted, the Common Core curriculum that was being instituted across the country. And so I think that right now Washington has heard the education system, heard the teachers, and trying to do what we can. Now that, again, we have to see how it's implemented. One of the big problems that I see in our schools is that Washington sends down unfunded mandates and local schools have to scramble and figure it out. One of the main things that was frustrating when I served in the state legislature, at times, it was almost all a bipartisan effort, and at times the funding of education, we were both frustrated enough that Democrats and Republicans would put money in and specify the amount of raises for the teachers, and without exception, when it got back to the local administration, they'd say, well, we just don't have enough. We had figured it out to the dollar, and local administration would turn it sideways. So the oversight of that has to come from the school board, people who are invested in their children's future. So I think with local control, local inputs, that we're going to be far better off than a national federal system that tries to mandate what you have to do here.
So education is basically the province of the states. But the federal government has a critical role to play in ensuring that we have standards and parameters. The quality of your education should not depend on where you happen to be living and growing up. It should not be a better education for wealthy communities than it is for impoverished communities. When I was in the public school system, I remember the United States educational system was the standard for the world. We've lost that. I think there's a very appropriate role for our federal government in terms of figuring out how we bring us back to that path of excellence, and then enabling that through the appropriate parameters, funding, expectations, standards for professionalism in the teaching arena. I think there's a very important role for the federal government. I'd like to see us headed back to excellence.
The idea that someone in Washington is going to care more or understand better how to educate your children is simply not one that I can identify with. I understand the role of standards. I think local school boards would be well equipped to establish standards. I think that the state has a deep responsibility to make sure that the 89 school districts here in New Mexico meet standards. But the idea that someone in Washington is going to come here and make your education better is one is an idea I have not seen that functions. And it's certainly not working in New Mexico right now with a tremendous amount of federal oversight.
So it's not an either-or scenario. Partnerships working between the federal government and the states would certainly be productive. And our representative government is very representative of the wide diversity of states, communities, challenges, and needs. I don't see that as mutually exclusive.
New topic, healthcare. Ms. Solz, what is your position on Obamacare and our current Medicare, Medicaid system? And if you believe that there's a better system to provide the American people comprehensive medical coverage, what would you propose?
So the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, took a big challenge of what we set out to do and has achieved a significant portion of that. 20 million people have health care coverage that didn't have it before. That's a huge accomplishment. You can't be denied coverage because of pre-existing conditions, and there's a long list of things that we did take on and improve. We're not done. I don't believe we've done the affordable part of the Affordable Care Act. I'd like to see competition in the insurance marketplace. I'd like to see taking on the underlying reasons for costs that are the highest in the world. We have a lot of work to do. I would be working on affordability. I would be looking at the model that Medicare is, a single payer system. I would be looking at a public option to provide competition in the insurance marketplace. I would be looking at our Veterans Health Administration, which has provided one of the best medical systems that we have here in this country. We have a lot still to do, but I don't want to go backwards.
Congressman Pearce.
The Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, was sold to the public that you can keep your doctor if you would like, and you can keep your insurance if you would like. Those things have not panned out, but they're not the most difficult part of what's happening under the Obamacare. It is the exchanges are having tremendous difficulty. Those were going to be one of the answers. 16 of the 23 co-ops that were established, those were going to bring the competition to the market. State-sponsored co-ops were set up. They took the money up front. The government gave them the money up front, and 16 of the 23 are bankrupt now. They had the money, they've spent it, and now they don't have any product. That's one of the difficult things about having the government try to run programs like this. But the program is also plagued by higher premiums, less coverage. Specialists many times are eliminated out of the plans because they're just too expensive. They can't be covered by the premiums that are there. So premiums are going up. Doctors are not as available as they used to be, so coverage is not as good. Deductibility, the deductibles are going up. The coverage is going down. All in all, the Affordable Care Act is in very deep difficulty. Now, understand that when the bill was passed, $700 billion was taken from Medicare from our seniors to move over to Medicaid to make this system work. And even with the $700 billion that causes our seniors not to have the coverage they used to have, the plan is still going broke. Those are fundamental problems. It should be replaced. I'll get into that in the next minute.
So this is all old news. I want to look to the future. Let's keep those additional 20 million people covered. Let's add the rest of the population to real health care. Let's take on the challenge of a competitive marketplace. Let's take on the challenge of affordability through additional capacity in our trained healthcare providers, which is currently artificially constrained. Let's take on the issue with cost-effective available medications that are currently not in this great country of ours, readily available or affordable. These are things that change our future. I very much want to move forward, and let's fix these things.
Congressman Pearce, you have the last word on this topic.
Sure. If we were to completely start over, I would keep a couple of provisions, and that one is one where the college students can stay until age 26. I think that the pools for high-cost people could be fixed. I don't think they're working exactly the way they should, but those are achievements that we should keep. Maybe one of the largest things is shopping across state lines. We do not get competition, especially in New Mexico, and you've seen Blue Cross Blue Shield completely go out of the state because of the problems in the Affordable Care Act. But if we have preventive medicine and restored the private market, you would have competition. We have no competition today. The competition is going broke trying to fill this bill. We must deal with this.
As a follow-on question, the second question on this topic, Congressman Pearce, do you support single-payer, universal health care? And if not, what alternative would you propose?
I think you can probably tell from the beginning that I would not support that. Again, you can look at Canada. When people start having problems there that are significant, they will come here and pay into our system to get coverage because it takes so long. Same thing is happening in England. So if we think we've got difficulties now, if we move to a single payer system, then I think that we're going to explore the very depths of difficulty at that point. What I would do is restore like I said, I think that if we have portability, that is where the person owns owns the insurance, not their company. That's one of the big problems. It's the reason you even have pre-existing condition problems. If you could buy your insurance as a young person and it stayed yours all the way through, you could shift jobs. You wouldn't have then coverage. You wouldn't have the problem of pre-existing. But also, the state of New Mexico puts tremendous requirements on health care plans. It's the reason there's not a lot of competition here. I think that we should look at the individual states, explain to people that if you're going to continue requiring companies to pay for things that people don't get, but cover part of the plan somewhere else, then the state is going to be not well served. But the private market always is going to have the best, most adaptable solutions, the deepest competition, and the best products to where you can choose what you want for your family. Look, one of the problems with the Affordable Care Act was families had worked decades to get the right thing that was tailored perfectly, and they stopped just like that. Those products are no longer available. So again, we can either act like they don't exist and move forward to a single payer plan, or we can try to restore the market and have the best insurance. It had flaws, but had the best insurance possible.
And so,
clearly, the free market doesn't work in the area of health care. That's why we took the step down Obamacare. Let's be clear. I believe universal health care is something that a country as great as we are can absolutely should commit to. I think our question is, how do we do it? A single payer system, that would be similar to our Medicare system. Medicare is working fairly well in terms of health outcomes at cost per person covered. Wouldn't bother me at all to use that single payer model. I think there's other possibilities. For the free market to work in this insurance-driven scenario that Obamacare has created, we need that competition. A public option would create real competition in the health insurance industry. And finally, you can go to what's been called socialist medicine, which is the model that our Veterans Health Administration uses. It again has had excellent outcomes in terms of coverage for our veterans that is the lowest cost of anything we're doing here in the United States. I think we need to explore all of these.
I would draw attention when we're talking about what works and what doesn't to Medicaid in New Mexico right now. Medicaid here is going broke. The federal government entices the states to adopt new parameters, gives them money up front. That money is spent, and now Medicaid here in this state is in desperate condition. That's what we're going to continue to see. We'll have to continue to bail out a system, any system that is a single-payer system. You can look at the VA system. Since I've arrived in Congress, we have, I think, probably doubled the money that's going to the VA. And I will tell you that there's no better service out there right now. It is not an improved service with all the money that we add to it. So again, I say that competition allows the bad to go broke. It allows the good to succeed and to continue providing better services. We are not getting that in our Veterans Administration. We are not getting that in the Affordable Care Act, and we just can't act like it's okay.
So let's talk about the Veterans Health Administration, which is covering so many more of our veterans today. It's not the amount of money, it's the money per person that is the measurement that applies. I continue to maintain our Veterans Health Administration is doing an excellent job. It's a great investment for this country and could potentially be a model for how to do health care. I will also say that I'm proud of New Mexico for expanding Medicaid, for making that choice that was available and making that commitment to the people of this state. I know there's financial challenges looming. It was still the right thing to do.
On the topic of immigration reform, Ms. Soles, do you support comprehensive immigration reform to provide the over 10 million undocumented immigrants a pathway towards citizenship? And if not, what are your proposed solutions to address immigration?
I do support comprehensive immigration reform, though I'm frustrated by tying all up into a ball with that term, the many individual challenges associated with immigration. I do support a pathway to citizenship. I support providing legal status to those who are here in this country living in the shadows, but raising their family and participating in our communities and working hard for a better future. I think the government is responsible for assuring that we are safe from those who do us harm, but I see no evidence that a wall on our southern border and militarization of that border is making us any safer. We live in a border community. El Paso is one of the safest cities in the nation. I would not tie security with a wall on our southern border.
Congressman Pearce, should I repeat the question?
No, I think I'm clear on it. The objective of any policy, any law, should be fairness. That's it. Sustainability is also important. When you take a look at the idea of comprehensive immigration reform, understand that that generally means amnesty. That means that whoever comes here is going to be forgiven and given citizenship. Now, this is what Mr. Reagan tried. Mr. Reagan had let that law pass, signed it, that said we're going to grant citizenship to 1 million people who are here illegally, and then we're going to close the border down second. Well, they never got around to securing the border, and so now we have somewhere between 10 and 30 million people here, because who would not want to come to this land of hopes and dreams. That's the sustainable part. I've been to China. I have been to India. Each are about the same geographic size as the United States. They have similar characteristics. Each one has over 1 billion people, and the poverty is tremendous there because there are not enough jobs. Now, sustainability says if we're going to give amnesty here, that tells people that come on and we'll fix it. We did it back under Reagan. If we do it now, that is a definite sign that we'll do it. So I don't see how it is also, that's the sustainability argument. Then fairness. Where is the fairness in those people who wait patiently? We help people try to come to this United States. Sometimes it takes, even with our assistance, up to 10, 12, 15 years. What is the fairness in allowing somebody to come here illegally while others are waiting to come here fairly? Finally, back on the sustainability, you have to ask yourself about the benefits. We're going to be responsible if we give citizenship for benefits for a lot of people. Now, many of your families are taking benefits because they've earned them. We have paid taxes for them, and suddenly there's going to be another requirement to pay more people. So I just don't see where we have the sustainability or the fairness in comprehensive.
So we're talking about securing the southern border, but somehow we have no need to do that with the northern border. I don't understand that that has to do with security for this country. We're talking about people that are here only wanting to work hard, raise their families, and create a future. Congressman Pearce and I are not even on the same page with this. I'm talking about families. I'm talking about people. I'm talking about their futures. And I don't see these people as this huge threat to our way of life. We live at the crossroads of a continent. Historically, that should be a huge opportunity for us here in our border state. And instead, we put this artificial barrier up. It's not working. This so-called process, go to the end of the line and follow the process, we don't have a process, folks. 20 years is not a process. We need to fix it.
The idea that we would secure both the northern and southern borders, I absolutely agree with. Absolutely agree, and have voted against the wall many times. I've expressed that to our party leaders, and I think they understand that. The idea that we just have to open the border up. That's one I cannot ever understand. Mexico doesn't open its border up for us to go that way. What I would do, I would secure the border. I think it's going to take technology and people. That's fairly simple. After I secured the border, then I would fix the immigration laws. It should not take 20 years, but it does. Once we have done that, now we have a static problem, not a dynamic problem, and I would simply offer a guest worker program available to those who wanted to stay. You can't become a citizen, but if you want to work, then fine, we will let you work, let you be out of the shadows, no threats. But if you want to be a citizen, then you have to follow the process, whatever we have amended it to be, whatever we have changed it to be. But I talk to people regularly who are here in that status. They say, we're just here to feed our families. I'm sympathetic to that.
The second question under immigration reform for Congressman Pearce is specifically, what is your position regarding the DREAM Act, and how do you propose to address the dilemma of young people who have been raised as Americans but are hindered because of their immigration status?
The Dreamers, as they are called, I've visited with them multiple times. I sit down with them and am extraordinarily sympathetic to the problem. My statement to them, as always, and I will give it to you tonight, is that if we can show how we can solve the problem once, to where it just doesn't become the routine, to become the way that people come here, I would solve it today. I would take the lead on that. Now, there's an obstacle in that, and the obstacle happens to be both parties. I think both parties give lip service to doing something on immigration, yet I do not think either do. Republicans, I carried solutions that the right and the left would agree on back under Denny Hastert. But then when Nancy Pelosi took over, they had a Senate that could not be filibustered. Nothing could be stopped, and they did not put up a bill to solve the problem. So if we were to take a single standalone solution to the DREAMER Act, the DACA process, that is, by the way, the DACA process has been set aside as unconstitutional by a judge. It's being appealed. But if we were to take that, I do not think the leadership of either party would let it move. Beto O'Rourke and I, he's a young Democrat from El Paso, we just both were a little bit frustrated with each of our parties and began to work on legislation. It was not grand, but neither leadership would let those piecemeal pieces come forward. All we did is say that you got to have more training. He was seeing people in El Paso who were offended. I was seeing people in my district. The second was, when you have somebody that has been not allowed in or kicked out, they should have judicial review. Those are very simple things, and yet both leaderships are saying, no, it's all or nothing. We're going to not do one piece of it.
So everything that moves us forward towards a real future for real people, I'm in favor of the DREAM Act, which is now a bit stuck. I'm in favor of DACA. I'm in favor of DAPA. They're only band-aids, however. We need to get serious about the real challenge, which is granting legal status to those who are here. The notion of deporting 11 million immigrants is absurd to me. I believe each and every one of us knows someone we care about. Someone we care about that would be in that deportation pile. That's not who we are. For people who are here, who are contributing parts of our communities, let's just get on with it and solve these problems for real. Instead of blaming what's gone on in the past, we need to create a future.
I've already responded once.
Veterans Affairs is the next topic, and for Ms. Souls, veterans have complained about substandard service from the VA, specifically long waits to see specialists for chronic illness and lack of attention to serious illnesses that have resulted in death. What is your proposed solution?
So I have great respect for our veterans, those people who put on a uniform and took an oath to protect our Constitution, our country. That's a huge commitment. I believe our democracy is stronger when we keep our promises to our veterans. of these issues, I think it's very possible that they may be isolated, they may be broad spread. We need to step up to that. We need to identify where those issues are occurring. We need to invest in making the system work. I do believe it's part of who we are. It's part of why this democracy is something that is so strong when we keep our promises to our veterans.
The VA system is broken very badly. We first came in contact with, as I began to serve as a veteran myself, I really paid attention to what people were saying. We began to call the administrators in Albuquerque and in El Paso in public town halls to where they could answer the questions, not me. After we began to do it, we could see some improvement of service. But then 2 years ago, we saw that dramatic cases across the country where veterans were dying while on secret lists. And the reason they kept a secret list, they get bonuses if the waiting time was below a certain amount. So the administrators of the different hospitals would have these handwritten lists, and they'd put them in the computer when they got down to about 30 days. An IG report was commissioned by Congress. Up to 300,000 people died in that wait. 300,000 people. That does not sound like an efficient, effective service that my opponent is describing. I think it is a horrid situation. And plus, when we had the solution, we passed the Choice Act. That was where you could choose. If they can't get to you, you can choose to go to your local providers and get service. It is the VA who is fighting that. The President signed that bill. It was bipartisan through the House and the Senate, and yet the VA still refuses to try to, they want that money coming back into them so bad. The Albuquerque VA has been identified as a key to all of these problems. Our veterans here are suffering in a system that is not working.
So let's be clear. Congressman Pearce has a history of voting against funding for the Veterans Administration. He voted against increased funding to address PTSD and suicide prevention for our veterans. He voted against increased funding to reduce the backlog of veterans' claims for disability benefits. He voted against the restoration of the pension cuts for veterans and military pay raises. Congressman Pearce is not funding veterans as if he's a friend.
Again, I would call you all to look at the exact bills that she's talking about. Each one of them has some hook in it. That's one of the problems in Congress. You can never get an even look at it. I have voted for the funding of veterans to the point where we are almost double funding the system to what we had when I showed up. But it's possible under procedural rules to bring votes that would kill an entire funding bill or kill a bill. Those are motions to recommit. Those are procedural. You shouldn't and can't count those as a vote against veterans. I will tell you that my opponent says the system is good, efficient, and it is anything but that. It is working horribly for our veterans. They need a choice. We have passed the bill, and the VA refuses to implement that choice in most places.
We have a major crisis of veterans with PTSD and a high number of suicides. How would you address this problem, and do you have specific proposals that would streamline the bureaucracies of the VA and Medicare?
I'm one of the few members of Congress that served in the military. There's even a smaller few who actually were in combat. I have seen it up close and feel the deepest sympathy that I can for those who are affected by the PTSD. One of the problems with our VA system is that generally on active duty, those members who are troubled by PTSD are put into a single unit. They are then seen and counseled almost daily. The VA, with all of the increases in funding, somehow doesn't find the resources to address the PTSD. We have worked to get a PTSD clinic here, make the hospital in Albuquerque, a center of excellence for PTSD. They kind of stalled out on that. New Mexico Veteran Services got a grant for PTSD, and still not much is happening. We, again, in the choice bill, and that before the chairman took it and made it his bill, that was my bill. It had languished for 8 or 9 years. I've been introducing it. It was only when the population got hopping mad about the problem that they took it and passed that choice bill. But I showed where people in Roswell could find local help in the choice program much cheaper than just the gas money to go to Albuquerque, and the Veterans Administration still refuses to even let them use gas money for care. So these obstacles just can't be imagined. One of the great sins of the VA is that they started building a facility in Denver, $300 million, it went to $600, went to $900. We finally in Congress pulled the plug at $1.4 billion. If they had used that for PTSD, we'd be a lot further along.
Congressman Pearce continues to reference this choice bill. I would describe the choice bill as being a mechanism to allow for-profit endeavors to get into that big funding stream that comes out of the federal government. My background in manufacturing says that's not the way to reduce costs and increase accountability. It increases costs, it adds a middle person, it adds profit, and it puts accountability one step farther away from the Department of Veteran Affairs that is the organization responsible. There's a number of initiatives that are aimed at taking out of the responsibility of the federal government and putting it into a for-profit scenario. I don't see that as helping our veterans. I don't see that as increasing accountability. Let's get on with the real job of assuring that we have the appropriate services, that they're properly funded, and they're in the location that they're needed to serve our veterans.
My opponent describes this bill as if it were kind of a solitary venture. If she has problems with the intent, maybe she should bring it up with the president who signed it. Maybe she should bring it up with the Senate who passed the bill also, and the Democrats who voted for it, which was almost unanimous. The same in the House. Everyone saw this as a solution. Now, to show you the ineffectiveness of the bureaucracy, we also put a provision that if you didn't do your job and you're a high-level manager, you could be terminated. To this date, 2 years later, no one has been terminated. The chairman of the committee goes and says, why are you not fixing the problem? And they just refuse to answer. So it doesn't sound like we're getting a good deal. It doesn't sound like that the VA is going to fix it next week. And the idea that you the veteran, you the voter, could not express your choice better than someone in Washington is one I think that will be the difference all evening between my opponent and me.
So, this then becomes an attack on appropriate review and procedures for establishing the basis for terminating someone's employment. I grew up in an environment where you had to have cause. I think cause is an appropriate standard for termination. So we're throwing this back and forth. The bottom line is we need to invest in keeping our promises to our veterans where they live, where they need services, and that's what makes us great.
Turning to the economy, specifically economic development and opportunities, Ms. Souls, would you support penalizing businesses that outsource American jobs to other countries to avoid our tax system? And if not, what alternative policies do you support that will best stimulate the economy and help take the burden off the middle class?
So I lived through globalization in the course of my career. I had the privilege of living here in Las Cruces and working in Juarez, Mexico for the last 3 years of that career. I maybe have a different perspective on what's going on with globalization. We are a member of a global economic community. I think there's no point in trying to deny that. I am concerned about tax dollars leaving the United States. That's a critical concern, and when those tax dollars leave, the economic prosperity that they represent goes with them. So what you should know about me, I believe when the economy improves, when the money moves. And when the economy improves, the deficit dissolves. I will focus on everything that gets that money moving and keeps it here in the United States, working towards the vitalization of our economy right here.
The idea of penalizing companies for leaving the country is one that has a lot of appeal, one that a lot of people say, yes, yes. But you have to understand the reasons. Sometimes they're just bad actors, and that's all you can say about them. But many times the companies are leaving because the taxes are here are too high, or the regulations too stringent. So President Obama, in 2 States of the Union message, said our corporate taxes are too high, our business taxes are too high. We're the highest in the world at 36%. He said we should work on that, so I sent him a handwritten letter the next day after that and said I will work across party lines with you because I think that you're there. If we were to lower our tax rate, I think on the companies that provide jobs, I think we would find that that companies would come back and bring their manufacturing back. One of the great problems in the American economy is we have transitioned from a manufacturing economy into a retail economy. 75% of our jobs and wages are retail. That's not a sustainable place. That's not where you can have prosperity. So if we were to affect the tax rate in a positive way, that almost always shows that the movement would occur like it did to Ireland. They lowered their tax rate from 36% to 12%, and companies flocked in there. My brother-in-law went and built a factory to make drill bits back 20 years ago. But as they began to raise the taxes, raise the obstacles, my brother-in-law went back 2 years ago and dismantled that same plant. So the government has a lot to do with where manufacturing is.
So let's do some myth busting. Reducing taxes on large corporations does not create jobs. Look at the example in terms of Kansas and California. Kansas took the approach that they were going to reduce taxes. They're now facing huge budget deficits. The state is not able to conduct its business. California took the opposite approach. They chose to raise incremental taxes. And they're finding that they're able to fund the work the government needs to do for all of us, and that they're running a surplus. Let's put to bed this myth that reducing taxes leads to increased economic prosperity.
Again, I would draw your attention to Ireland. It was a very clear example of what happens with tax policy. But we can't forget the regulations that are choking businesses out here. New Mexico used to have 123 mills processing timber. We would cut the timber in the forest, move it down, process it. Then the government put a regulation in called the spotted owl. Now we've got 1 mill left. 122 mills closed nationwide, 85% of an industry gone to protect the spotted owl. And about 3 years ago, the Fish and Wildlife Service said, whoops, logging wasn't the problem. We killed 85% of an industry, 122 mills in New Mexico, over something that was untrue to start with.
Congressman Pearce, do you support a flat tax? And if not, what type of middle class tax incentives do you support?
I would support anything that is more equitable. Flat tax has its promises, but I tell you, a flat tax has the downside that that's what we had here 100 years ago. So the idea that we would just make it work that is one that has question to it. What I would typically support more would be the fair tax. That's a sales tax. New Mexico gets most of its revenue from its sales tax. Less comes from our income tax. So the sales tax is a fair tax. Right now, if you make illegal incomes in America, you live tax-free. If you're in prostitution, drugs, or running guns, whatever you happen to choose, you get to live tax-free. If we have a sales tax, everybody's going to participate. Also, if you have a sales tax, you know exactly every day how much you're paying in taxes. You want to pay less in taxes? Just throttle back on the spending just a bit. You're able to control it. Right now, people do not know what they're paying in taxes. It's taken out before they see it, and that's done for a reason, because people would absolutely come up in arms if they had to write a single check for what we're charging them. Many times people say, well, we've got a budget problem. We need to increase taxes. I think we have a tax problem. I do not think we need to increase taxes.
I think a flat tax is a horrible idea. And clearly the definition of fair depends on where you stand. So a flat tax means that a family that's earning $20,000 a year and barely getting by is going to pay the same tax as someone earning $100,000 a year. It's going to pay the same tax as someone earning $1 million a year. I don't think that's right. I don't think we should be funding the government on the backs of those most challenged economically. I believe we ought to be putting in place a progressive income tax, but that progressive tax should have incremental increases as someone's income goes up. For me, that means not changing most of our taxes, but increasing the tax rate on those that are making a significant amount more than the average American. That's the way to fund our government fairly.
The idea of taxing the rich usually has a nice sound to it, like, let's get to them. But the truth is, if you were to just take everything, let's just say for discussion that we confiscate everything that the rich have. These are the billionaires, those people. You would not fund the government for 1/2 year. And then next year you have a significant problem because many times they're employers, so you have that. So the idea that we're going to get to a balanced budget or get our deficits and debt under control by taxing the rich, it simply doesn't pan out on numbers. As far as the idea of the sales tax or fair tax being unfair to the people at the bottom, you can have all of the exclusions, the extensions that you want. Every tax system can be made to where the people at the lowest end of the spectrum, and we can choose what that is. It's possible to have all of those parameters built in. But at some point, we have to deal with the fact that a lot of people just refuse to pay taxes. Right now, about 1 million employees in the federal government don't pay $3.3 billion of taxes a year. That's a problem.
Yes.
Okay. I said, when the money moves, the economy improves. The problem with not taking tax revenues out of the very wealthy, large corporations, and those making a significant amount of income, is that the money stops moving. It goes into someone's pocket. It goes into a bank account in Switzerland. It stops the money moving. Taxed by the government will put that right back into circulation, and that money movement that gets our economy moving forward then leads to the dissolving of the deficit. That's the way to address the budget problem and the budget shortfall. Get the economy moving.
The sixth topic is the environment. Ms. Souls, do you support the preservation of indigenous sacred sites from mining, drilling, and fracking? And if not, what is your solution to repairing relations between the U.S. and tribal governments?
I think this district is very fortunate to have a number of Native American tribes that are located physically right here. These are independent, sovereign nations. I do believe that the United States has a trust responsibility to look out for and protect those indigenous sacred sites on behalf of those native tribes. Now I don't remember the rest of the question.
All of these questions were designed to try and provide quite a bit of latitude for the speakers, but we may have been a little overly optimistic here. The question is, do you support the preservation of indigenous sacred sites for mining, drilling, and fracking? And if not, what is your solution to repairing relations between the U.S. and private governments?
So I answered the first part as yes. In terms of the solution to repairing relations, I think it has to do with interacting with the respect that we would accord any sovereign nation. Our Native American communities are not stepchildren. They're an integral part of the diversity, the history, the cultures that we have right here in New Mexico. I'm looking forward to being a real champion for our Native American communities.
The PROTECT Act is one which I just sponsored and was the lead sponsor on that and was passed a couple of weeks ago. The Senate passed the senator's version, so we Republicans in the House with the Democrats in the Senate said that the cultural significance of our Native Americans is extraordinary. This bill was a long time coming. I'm proud of the fact that we did that. I also sponsored the Native American Housing Act. On the HOSDA Act, I'm the lead sponsor. Again, very bipartisan bill. We passed that and put it in front of the Senate. So I watched the relationships with our Indian tribes very much. And when we're talking about would we categorically exclude things, I think we should begin the discussion with the tribes themselves. What do you want and what do you not want? Then the environmental impact studies required for any major project. We'll take a look at the cultural significance. Is it going to disrupt? And that pauses many different projects. So there's this process that the government looks at, but there's also a process where we work with the voices of the Native Americans. A good example of how to move forward in this sort of thing is the uranium mines keep when the price of uranium spikes up. The idea of starting a mines back up in Grants, which is surrounded by Indian tribes, is one that's very prevalent. I sat down with the leaders, and initially they said, we don't want anything because the government left this problem when it was mining before. So we worked our way through it, and they said, you know, we would like to have the jobs, but we want to keep our air clean, our water clean, and our ground clean. I said, I totally agree with that. So let's work together. We are still in the process of working together on that, but their voice is the one that dominates.
So let's change the subject a little bit. The Dakota Access Pipeline, which is a scenario where there's a proposed pipeline that the Native American community that is adjacent to it, has sacred sites that would be affected by it, is completely in opposition. And yet there's still a force to try and move forward because there are factions that want to exploit taking that oil and getting it down to our southern locations of refinery. I stand with the Dakota Sioux tribe and the other Native American communities that are using this as the example of stop exploiting us and those lands that are precious to us. I agree that we should work with them about what's appropriate for their communities, but we have to avoid that temptation to exploit and self-justify.
Again, I think the government process is set up for the environmental impact study to allow the Native Americans to speak. I'm aware of the situation. It's not in this state, but it's a key situation, and we'll help as that moves forward. Again, I think that many of the tribes do want jobs. They do want prosperity. So we've been working with many of the tribes in the 2nd District saying, why don't you think about this as an avenue to make money other than gaming, because eventually the gaming money will not be as sustainable as it is now. Looking for opportunities, looking at the housing, protecting the cultural awareness of the tribes, that's something that I take great pride in. I'm probably one of the most active 4 or 5 members in Congress on that, and will continue to be.
Congressman Pearce, the last prepared question is, what is your position on the role of federally managed public lands regarding conservation in general, and specifically with regard to water shortages and alternative energy?
The management of our public lands is important in the West. Generally, about in this state, about 35% of our lands are held by the federal government. Another 30% or so are held by the state government. So that management of public lands is extremely important. I think that we should have multiple accesses, multiple uses on our land, depending on where it is and what the uses might look like. I will tell you that Doña Ana County, it was kind of on the front lines nationally of a discussion and a battle about this very issue. Doña Ana has only 15% of its surface area that is private. That's one reason that it's so expensive to build here. And when you build, you're actually taking away farmland, which is the heart of the economy here. It's a very prevalent part of your economy, your way of life. And so I hate to see that use happening. But a bigger issue is the water. If you take a look at our forest, used to our forest had 50 trees per acre. Science, the pictures from the past will show us that. Today we got 2,500 trees per acre. Those trees are sucking up the water, not allowing it to percolate into our streams and aquifers. Therefore, our streams just don't have the water that they used to. If we manage our lands more properly, if we had balanced thinning programs, mechanical thinning programs, I will guarantee that we would have more water. You just can't continue to let our forests burn. So the management of our public lands is extraordinarily important. Also, I have a bill in Congress right now, I'm a co-sponsor on a bill that would implement more solar and geothermal on public land. So obviously I'm in favor of the alternative energy sources. We'll have more in the next section.
So Congressman Pearce just said that he is in favor of alternative energy sources. And yet he put out a statement just this past week in regards to the Pearce Climate Accord. And he said that that was not constitutional. It was. He said that it was leading us down the path of higher energy costs. It doesn't. Solar and wind is the lowest cost energy today. But it's leading us down the path of higher electricity costs. I know something about electricity costs from my work on the El Paso electric rate case. So electricity costs. Xcel Energy over in the southeast sector just signed a purchase power agreement for solar at 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Right here, El Paso Electric has solar, a purchase power agreement, at 5 cents a kilowatt hour. The El Paso Electric rate case last year was about natural gas-fired generation at 10.9 cents a kilowatt hour. We got to get honest with ourselves, folks, about what our future is, because climate change is with us. Our desert is getting hotter and drier. These issues of water management, I believe, are going to be the key issue in this next decade. New Mexico is surrounded with thirsty neighbors. By that I mean Texas, Arizona, Mexico. It's my belief that only our federal government is going to be able to help us find a way forward to take on these critical challenges related to water and climate change.
Again, the idea that solar and wind are cheaper somehow, the fact that you're quoting numbers like 3.5 cents or 5 cents completely disregards the federal subsidy that goes to each one. Both are heavily subsidized. Neither are economically viable right now. They're not viable for you. How many total solar homes do you see that are not connected to the grid? Wind does not blow every day. The sunshine does not work every day. But when it does, the solar efficiencies and the wind efficiencies are down in the 12% range. If we're going to have manufacturing jobs, good, strong economy, we need dependable sources of energy. Yes, I would like to see alternative sources explored, but we cannot count on those and say the price is less.
I worked with El Paso Electric in the rate case last year that resulted in a savings to Doña Ana County of $7.5 million every year for the next 10 years. That $75 million stays here in this community. But I didn't do that just because I was bored. I did it because low-cost electricity is critically important to bringing manufacturing jobs and economic prosperity here to southern New Mexico. We have the unlimited resources in our wind, in our solar, We have the ability to create energy technologies for the future. This is what we ought to be doing right here, and we've got to start by getting honest about the costs and what it means to us and our prosperity here in southern New Mexico.
To the member of the audience whose question I'm about to ask, you probably want to see if you can get a Powerball, because we're going to have time for probably one question for each of the candidates to use the same format, 2 in 1, 2 in 1. So I believe Congressman Pearce, what are your plans to address human-caused climate change?
The plans to address climate change are just probably the first thing you have to do is get precise on what the question is. And the question is man-made climate change, that we affect. Now, there is great disagreement among our scientists.
Would the audience please give the congressman and any other speaker courtesy and not cut into their time? Can we add some more time, please?
So when you dig into the 97,000 scientists who have supposedly signed on, many were not told exactly what the survey was. Many were conditional. So this idea that it's totally determined that man is causing it, I don't think there's much doubt. The numbers show that it has gotten warmer. The question is, what can we do about it? Now, if we understand that the real question is, what has man done to it? The second piece of that is, how much are you willing to allow your taxes to be raised to pay for it? Because the cap and trade system that was postulated about 4 or 5, 6 years ago was never going to affect climate change. It wasn't going to affect the pollution. What it was going to do is send money to third world countries. That's what this is about, a way to take your tax money and send it over there and make other countries wealthy. Now that's where you really start seeing money going to Swiss bank accounts, when you start sending billions overseas. I would do everything within my possibility to stop the carbon emissions. We have done dramatic work on that. But we cannot just say that we don't need fossil fuels. That's generally the target of climate change proponents. The fossil fuels fuel the world. In Europe, they have tried to back away from fossil fuels. It's become too expensive. They're losing their manufacturers because of the cost of energy. They're retreating away and saying, wait, we can't do this program. So I think before we dig in and say what we should do from the government, we ought to look what's happening worldwide.
So just to be clear, climate change is human-caused increase in the average global temperature, global warming. And just last week, the Paris Climate Accord went into effect because it passed the benchmark of the 55% of the signatories signing on, ratifying it, that represent 55% of the global carbon emissions. This has to do about responsibility. Think about what you're going to say to your grandchildren when they look at you and they say, why didn't you do something? The debate is no longer about is it or isn't it. The debate should be about what are we going to do. Our desert is getting hotter and drier. Sea levels are rising. They are inundating our coastal areas and our naval bases. We're experiencing more extreme weather patterns. We need to get serious about how do we prepare for that. And then we have to take on the question of how do we slow it? How do we stop it? How do we reverse it? That's the responsible position and the big challenge in front of all of us.
Almost every one of the predictions that Mr. Gore gave us simply not happened. I hear that the sea level is rising, and in fact, south of Hawaii, about 1,000, 1,200 miles, there's a series of islands called the Kiribati Islands, used to be the Christmas Islands. They actually were worried enough about what was being told about the rising levels that one island took up a collection, and they went and bought a place where they could retreat to when the sea got up. Just this last Easter, I left on a round-the-world trip in my private small plane. I flew through Kiribati. It is 1 foot above sea level, and no one's had to leave. No one has had to evacuate. They still operate as usual. I asked them about rising sea levels. I said, we don't know what you're talking about. So again, when we are going to raise your taxes based on things that are supposedly happening, I would suggest that we take a slower approach.
Ms. Hall.
U.S. Department of Defense has asked for funding so that they can prepare for, plan, and address the challenges to our national defense presented by climate change. Congressman Pearce voted against providing that funding. I'm back to you, I think that's horribly irresponsible.
Have you endorsed the top of your party's ticket? Why or why not?
So for me, I'm a wannabe congresswoman. I haven't actually been asked. I wish I had been. I'm proud to be on the ticket with Secretary Hillary Clinton. I do in fact believe that we are stronger together, and I look forward to going to work in Congress in service to Hillary Clinton as our next president.
I have said that I would gladly support Mr. Trump, but I've also withheld an endorsement in order to get his attention and say that you have a problem with Hispanics. 52% of this district is Hispanic. I'm very tuned in. We get good support from that community. And so I'm using what little position that I have to say, please get that conversation right, with the idea that I would not support him and would support the other candidate comes down to an experience that I had back in 1972. I was in my C-130. We were flying above the DMZ, there, the demilitarized zone. It was the most hostile part of the war. And we heard the fighter jets up. We heard the SAM missiles. One got shot down. I listened as the first guy got picked up by the helicopter. Nearing dark, the other one was saying, I'm a quarter of a mile away. They were saying the rules don't allow us to come on shore. I listened. We were there all night. That mission was a 14-hour mission. We were there the next morning when they came and said, we got permission to come in and get you. He never answered. He had died in the middle of the night at the hands of the enemy because of a regulation. Now, when I see that Benghazi, the people in our military were asking for help, and I cannot go and support someone that said, no, I cannot. I live with that. I saw it from my government. I have anger today about that. Still, that situation and seeing what happened to our ambassador and those 3 Navy SEALs was something I cannot support in any way.
So, Congressman Pearce said, and I'm going to quote you, I hope I don't get this too wrong, that when you support, it's like you wear the sneakers. That when you endorse, it's when you're Michael Jordan and you receive millions. So Congressman Pearce supports Donald Trump and has told him he needs to fix his relationship with the Hispanic community. Well, how is that working for you? I say,
Ladies and gentlemen, you understand the rules. If you keep interrupting, you're depriving all of us of the possibility of trying to squeeze in one more question of substance.
I say, Congressman Pearce, if the shoe fits, wear it.
The idea that you cannot affect the discussion is one that I simply don't believe. Maybe that's true of my opponent. She was willing to sit in her boardroom. She said she was in the boardroom when they carried her jobs to Mexico. They outsourced. I believe that we should be speaking out in any way that we can. So I've expressed discontent with the wall. I don't hear him saying that as much. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, but I don't think he can pass it. I've been willing to fight my party when I think they're wrong, been willing to fight the other party when I think they're wrong, and I will do it in this case. So it doesn't matter. I have gotten my voice heard. His team has acknowledged it, and we'll eventually get where we need to be.
We are almost on time. If we are to take one or two more questions, we will have to go over the stated time that both campaigns have agreed to. I'm prepared to ask about your endurance and patience level. Do we have time for at least one more 12-minute question?
I just flew a single-engine airplane around the world, 26,000 miles by myself. I've got the endurance.
Are we agreed with that?
Absolutely.
So we'll get to one final question. If I can read the writing. This is essentially a redundant question. I'm going to exercise my judgment and pull another question that was addressed to fossil fuels, renewables, solar, wind, thermal. Should we still be having new drilling mining instead of investing in improving renewables? And I think we have touched on that. So we will end with something that we haven't touched on. What is your position on legalizing recreational marijuana?
Okay. So, I've watched with interest what is going on in Colorado, just to the north of us, and in the state of Washington, where my daughter and my son-in-law reside. And it appears to me that in legalizing recreational marijuana, none of the terrible things that were predicted have come to pass. And that what is happening is that states essentially have diversified into a new industry, are raising tax revenues that are serving the state and its people. What I do also see, however, is that there is a problem with the federal government, which currently has marijuana listed as a Schedule I substance, meaning that those people, those companies, those businesses that are in the recreational marijuana field, even those with medical marijuana, are violating federal law. As the next Congresswoman representing this district, I look forward to taking marijuana off of the Schedule I. It is not a dangerous drug. It does have useful medical purposes. It is not addictive. That's what I'm seeing in Colorado and Washington. I'd like to open the door for the states to take their path forward.
Congressman Pearce?
Perhaps I have a longer rear view mirror than some in this discussion. I remember the kids. I came here to New Mexico State when I graduated from Hobbs High. Came here in 1965, just as the big drug revolution was taking hold. And I saw a lot of people who never would have touched drugs. But it was here, and it was convenient, and it felt good. Now, looking back through the rear view mirror of life, I don't see the positive effects of that. I really don't see where it has been harmless. I do not see where families are well served and children are well thought out. If it's not a problem, then why would we limit professionals, aircraft pilots, surgeons, whatever? If it's just a recreational thing, it's okay. So I would not legalize the recreational marijuana. I was in Denver about 2 months ago, and I'll tell you, I saw a different sight than my opponent saw. I was walking downtown Denver and found kids, teenagers, early 20s, laying asleep in the street and the sidewalk at 9 o'clock in the morning. To say that that is not an effect on our society is one that, frankly, I can't condone or can't understand the viewpoint. We are struggling right now with employers finding workers who will show up, workers who can pass a drug screen, and we're going to say that it's okay, but you got to clean up before you go to work. I don't understand how we will have drug screens for key items, for key work, for key jobs. There are many things that, as long as it's just one state, might work out okay, and the rest of us will pick up the slack to say that it's okay, that it's we're going to legalize it. I don't see myself going there.
We're going to have
It saved
to avoid.
my life, it saved my mother during her terrible battle with cancer that she lost in January. It is safe, exponentially
Ma'am,
safer than alcohol.
please respect the rest of the audience. Thank you. We're going to have to truncate any response in order to stay on schedule. One of the campaigns has insisted, I guess, probably because of broadcast, that we must stay on schedule, and we want to ensure that we have time for closing statements, and we are pretty much on time. So, Congressman Pearce, do you wish to go first or second in making your 90-second closing
I'll
statement?
go second.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a job interview. I'm seeking to serve as your next Congresswoman. Congressman Pearce, after 12 long years as our representative in Washington, is seeking another term. I'm a political outsider. He's a long-time political operator. I'm seeking a future of opportunities. He's firmly holding on to the past. I'm asking you to fire him and hire me. Ask yourself, do we need effective, responsible government in order to live safe, healthy, prosperous lives? Do we need to shut down and dismantle government, or protect it and improve it? Ask yourself, is New Mexico well served with more of the same that we've had for the last many years, or with a Congress ready to work?
You got the last one?
I wasn't.
I'm sorry.
Give me a little more time there, if you would.
What is it,
My name is Merrie. I will show up for you. I will stand up for you. I will fight for you. And together we'll create a future that works for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask for your vote. I ask that you put me to work as your next Congresswoman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Osorio. I appreciate your good job here tonight. Thanks again to LULAC and to the Dream Center. And thanks to my opponent, Ms. Souls. We might not agree on things, but this is a difficult job, and anyone who is willing to step up and say, I would take the task, should be respected for the decision. I think the thing that I would close with is that many items are simply, you have to get them through in bipartisan fashion. Both my parents were Democrats until well into my adulthood, so I find myself working fairly well. I mentioned with Mr. O'Rourke in El Paso, but also I worked with the administration on getting an Arizona water settlement that had been dangling since 1968. You've seen about the gases in the Forest Service up in Weed, New Mexico. That was a 25-year problem. The Forest Service blocking them from the water the court said belonged to them 25 years. I took it on. We've worked on it 12 years. We just inked the agreement 2 weeks ago. HUD reform, VA reform, very bipartisan. Fort Wingate, again, working with Mr. Lujan. So I think that the efforts that we put out working for people every day, people exactly like you just trying to go to work, people like my parents trying to raise a family, deserve to be sent back to Washington. I'm asking for your support, and I would ask for your prayer. God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen,